Thank you, Mayor Williams. The next item on the agenda is the request to allow temporary signs of on Town of Farragut public property and right-of-way.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. This purpose of this agenda is to review a request by some 2022 Town of Farragut Mayor and Alderman candidates, Mr. Bill Johns, Adam Atherton, and David White, to be able to place temporary political signs on Town of Farragut property, public property, or rights-of-way. Just as a little background, the Town of Farragut first adopted our sign ordinance on October 9th, 1980, and since that initial sign ordinance was adopted, all signage placed on public property or right-of-way without the written consent of the public authority having jurisdiction over the property has been prohibited. Also at that time, political signs were specifically not permitted on streets or highway rights-of-way nor any other public property. So the purpose and intent of the sign ordinance states in section 109-2 that it is to regulate basically the physical characteristics of signs within the town in order to promote the health, safety, and welfare of the town, to also maintain, enhance, and improve the aesthetic environment of the town by preventing visual clutter, and also by avoiding signage that is a threat to safety due to its placement and other physical characteristics. Historically, any signs placed on public property or in the right-of-way have been prohibited. We have 45 miles of rights-of-way and 188 acres of parkland to maintain. Many times when these signs get placed in those locations for extended periods of time, that can lead to those properties not being able to maintain, lead to visual clutter, and also potential safety issues for motorists traveling throughout the town. Again, these candidates have asked to allow them to be able to place their signs in the rights-of-way. In the same way that Knox County Highway Department allows during their elections, and that document is attached for your review. Section 109 of the sign ordinance does prohibit these signs without the written consent of the Town of Farragut, and so the Board of Mayor and Aldermen would need to approve the request in order to allow signage on public property during the current election cycle. I do recommend denial of this request, and I believe that Mr. White is here as one of the applicants for this request.
David, just for clarity, do I hear from the applicant first, or do we make a motion first?
You can hear from the applicant first. Okay. That's fine.
All right. Mr. White.
David White, 314 Bel Air Drive in Bel Air subdivision. After hearing his report, I want to read. And I gave a copy of all my documents to the recorder. I'd like to make a part of the minutes. Please accept this official request for written consent for candidates in the 2022 Town of Farragut election. Bill Johns, Adam Atherton, and David White be allowed to place temporary political signs on public properties or right-of-way as per the Town of Farragut Code Ordinance, Sign Ordinance, Chapter 109, Section 109.11, General Restrictions, Item 1 and E, and F, Item 2B, and the Knox County Election Commission signage guidance, regulations, and political signs for Knox County Highway Department. And there's a little history behind this that I want to go into first. When I received my packet from the Knox County Election Commission, on that packet, they have a couple of places here who have adopted a policy that they don't want political signs on their property. Perfectly legal, perfectly right. Their names are in here. Meridian Baptist Church, Downtown West. They don't allow signs on there. That's fine. They're allowed to do that. I don't see anywhere in here where Farragut has a policy. As a matter of fact, we were told to go by this policy, where they allow the signs to be placed on right-of-way temporarily, and then there's all kinds of rules. You can't block an intersection. You can't put them where they're a danger. So under those guidelines, I placed some signs. I got a call from Mark Shipley telling me that I had placed my signs illegally and I needed to pick them up or they'd be confiscated. So I mentioned the Knox County Election Commission guidelines. He didn't know anything about them. So I actually took him a copy to his office. He was surprised that they had changed their requirements. But nevertheless, I went the next morning and picked my signs up. Because financing my own campaign, I didn't want to lose $9 signs. So I picked them up. Then I requested a meeting with Mark and David to discuss this policy. In the meantime, I looked through the code. And he read some of the code. Of course, it didn't apply to what's actually happening. It benefited his decision. Signs not requiring permits of the following signs are exempted from permit requirements and must be in compliance with all requirements of this chapter. That's pretty simple. Political or campaign signs are provided for by TCA Title II, Chapter 7, Section 143 of the Tennessee Freedom of Speech Act. Temporary signs of any kind are, unless a permitting process is specifically required in association with specific events and programs or community objectives promoted by the town of Farragut. Surely to goodness you promote the election for office to serve on this board. Section B, any sign placed on public property or right-of-way without the written consent of the public authority having jurisdiction over the property. The intent and purpose of that section is to give the town the right and the ability to allow certain signs in something they sponsor or something that they're accountable for. You're responsible for the election. It's held for the town of Farragut. It's not held for anybody else. This section is plenty good. It's good because it gives it power to one man to make the decision. I furnished Mr. Smoak with Section 109-7 administration. The sign administrator to enforce this chapter. The town administrator and or his designee shall act as a sign administrator and shall enforce and carry out all provisions of this chapter. In the event there is a question concerning the general intent, meaning, or provision of this chapter, the sign administrator shall have the authority to make it such administrative decision and interpretations. I don't know why we're here. It's his job. I showed this to him. He didn't even know it was there. He didn't know about these other that you could get written permission. But he knows now. And he don't like it. Because I don't know who he designated as to take over his responsibility. Was it all you guys? He putting it all on you, or did he pick one? The obvious person would have been the town attorney, who has plenty of legal knowledge and understanding of the law, but it didn't happen. We have had, I was told by Mr. Smoak and Mr. Shipley that this policy of not allowing signs in the right-of-way has been forever and a day. It's not in this code. I've been here for 71 years. I was here before there was a town. I was here before any of y'all. I've worked in campaigns. I put up signs. I put up signs for John Grease years ago. And there hadn't been a policy then. And if there is a policy, where is it? I asked for it. Where's the law? And a good case in point is my opponent, Marty. who is on the Visual Resource Committee, by the way, who has everything to do with signs, about 4 days after I took my signs down, he put his signs up. I called Mr. Smoak immediately and I said, Marty's put his signs up inadvertently. He don't know the policy or something. And if what you're saying is true, y'all are going to confiscate his signs. So you might ought to show him the courtesy of calling him so he doesn't lose $9 signs and get them thrown away. Then I called Mark, told him the same thing. Well, about a week later, he got his signs up. But the point is, he's on the Visual Resources Committee who has to do with signs, and he didn't know about the policy. The policy is a joke. It's something that's been invented to try to work for right now, and that won't work. Say we've never allowed it because it's a policy. But if you were here during the primaries, you saw 100 signs on the lawn of the town hall. Did they have written permission? No. Nobody can find it. They didn't have it. So they didn't follow the code. But they were allowed to place signs on town property. Mr. Smoak was asked a question by a concerned citizen to clarify that the town did not allow signs. And he wrote back this letter. You are correct that no signs are allowed on public right-of-way or public property. No signs. There is allowed one sign per candidate per parcel as state law. The only sign the town allows is on public property is when the town hall building is used for early voting. We allow one sign per candidate at the corner of the town hall. Huh? How did you allow that? Was it by ordinance? Did they have a letter? Did they have it in writing? Or did you just say, okay, yeah, y'all can do it? Well, you can't do that. Everybody has to be treated the same. And every citizen in this town has a right to know who's running, whether they like them or not. But they have a right to know who it is. And if they want to find out more about them and make up their mind who they want to vote for, then they have that right. But I was specifically told in person by you and by the mayor, this town belongs to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. That's what I was told. When I tried to tell Mr. Smoak, I told him, you can solve this today. Right here's your authority. You have the right to say yes or no. It's you. He chose to delegate it to somebody else, but he had the authority and said I would have to go before the board. And I said, why? They can't vote on it. It's a conflict of interest. There's two guys on the board running for office. It's not a voting issue. It's not supposed to be voted on. It's supposed to be handled by the administrator. Now, he can deny it. And he did. And I think illegally. Because you have allowed signs all over this town. Even the town puts up signs. You put up signs to shop Farragut. Put them in the right of way. That's a town function. That's a good function. We want people to shop here. But you put the freaking signs up in the right of way and got away with it. When you say there's a policy, you don't allow any signs. So, it's up to you. There's plenty of code. There's plenty of evidence that your policy is either not a policy, it's not in writing, It's something that just came to somebody's mind because nobody knows it but you all. You allow some signs, but you don't allow the other. And the federal government does not allow that. In closing, I'll read this and make it a part of the minutes. The Supreme Court has regularly ruled the relationship that the government body regulating signs must be, the content must be neutral. In other words, you can't judge content. But if you allow one sign, you have to allow another because they have different content. That's my opinion. I'm not a lawyer. I'm probably not as smart as half the people in the room, but I can read. And I can see, I can comprehend things. The key part of this is nor deny any person within this jurisdiction the equal protection under the law. This means that the government must treat all speech equally. There is also a Supreme Court case, Reed versus Gilbert in 2015. If you allow one sign, but you don't allow another, then you're dictating speech because you're not letting the candidate, you're not giving him his rights under the Free Speech Act in order to be able to put his name out there. That's how I see it. That's where I'm going with it. I don't think the board voting on it would be a legal vote. The code is specific. So I think if it's Mr. Smoak's decision, and that's his decision, and he's not man enough to stand up and honor the code and admit that they've violated the code on several occasions by allowing some signs and not allowing others, then that's up to him. But this is a town. The citizens that live here have rights. They have a right to know who's running and pick who they want. I have a right to put up a sign to let them know. The board does not own the right-of-ways. They supervise them, and they do that by ordinance. That's the only law we have is ordinance. And this is not a change of this is not a variance. It's not a change of the code. It's a request. I don't think the board can vote on it. It's a non-voting issue.
Thank you, Mr. White. I appreciate your time.
Well, I'm glad I was done.
Well, you did say you were in closing. I'm sorry.
Well, it takes me a long time to close.
Do we have any public input for this? Oh, I'm sorry. Public input.
Yes, we have two speakers tonight. The first one is Pam Fody.
Your name and address in your 5 minutes.
Pam Fody, 12829 Stall Drive. So, when our family moved to the Knoxville area 10 years ago, we were drawn to Farragut for many reasons. Good schools, great parks, and just how the town looked and the feel of the town. One of the things that we noticed, which made Farragut very different from the rest of Knox County, was how clean, uncluttered, how well-maintained the town was. And that includes none of those signs you see everywhere. If you go through our neighboring counties or other areas of Knox County, you're just bombarded with this visual clutter along the sides of the road. And that was noticeably absent in Farragut. And I realized when I actually had the opportunity to read this book a few years ago, Full Speed Ahead, how Farragut was founded, that was not by chance, it was by design. And when Farragut was founded, they didn't want to be like Knox County. They didn't want to, my understanding is, adopt everything in Knox County. So one of the things that they did was put the sign ordinance in place. And one of the main reasons was to reduce the visual clutter. There's also safety concerns with line of sight. When you're at a corner, all these signs up, you can't see safely where you're going. You don't see pedestrians. So when I saw this request for the sign variance, I thought that this is kind of a slippery slope. If you start letting people put signs up, everyone's going to line up for any event that there is. I understand there's sign variances for very specialized events for 1 or 2 days, but this seemed to be a 30-day request, which to me, that looks like it's going to be a real visual impact, also a maintenance impact. Like who mows around these signs? Do they get, I imagine them turning into debris, clutter in the road, or they don't get mowed around and then the grass grows up. It just seems like it's a slippery slope and in the wrong direction, in a backwards direction for the town of Farragut. So, thank you.
Thank you, Pam.
Our next speaker is James Hill.
Mr. Hill, name and address, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, and I'm so thankful that there's a timer. My name is James Hill. I live at 11350 Gates Milk Drive in Sweetbriar. First of all, I'm trying to figure out how Mr. Wright, Gentleman Wright's been able to live here 75 years and not knowing what candidate was running for office. I think the policies for signage have been in place. I know I respect them. As a matter of fact, as a candidate for one of the alderman positions, I personally am not putting out a campaign sign until 30 days, probably prior to early voting. I just feel like that it clutters our area. It doesn't make it look good. You're going to have 2.5 months with signs coming up, and I don't think that there's any person that's not going to know that James Hill is a candidate for the office because I'm able to put my campaign sign in the right of way. I also think that if this is something that they're wanting to do on a temporary basis, that it would be a request for all candidates that were running for the office to have this privilege of posting campaign signs in the right of way and on special designations, not just limit the 3 that seem to be, together with some of this stuff. I travel all over Tennessee. My job allows me that. I love the state of Tennessee. I get to drive southeast. One of the things that stand out to me is how when you go to small towns, is especially this past week, there's elections coming up all over the place, and how posters and signs and billboards and yard signs and everything, they just wind up being cluttered. They're not very well taken care of. Of course, everybody knows they're never picked up after the elections are over with until somebody makes them go and pick up. But I think this is very important matter, because I say that because it's always good to leave the road, come back, and drive into the town of Farragut and see how organized and how well groomed the city is. With that being said, and so you are not that he's requested, or they've requested that you be a neutral party, I don't think that there's any. I'm on the party that's against this recommendation. I don't request for my signs as a alderman candidate to be put in the right of way or other special privileges. So being a candidate and kind of taking you guys out of the picture, I don't see to where it makes it where it's not a neutral vote. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Because they've given some misinformation.
I'll give you 2 minutes, Mr. White.
Number one, it's not a special privilege. It's in the ordinance. It's probably why you had one, you didn't read the ordinance. We're not asking for special privileges. It's in the ordinance. We are allowed to request written permission, but we're not allowed to request it for everybody. That would be a variance, which what the lady thought it was. It's not a variance. It doesn't change the code. It's simple. You can have a sign in the right-of-way for 30 days before the election and remove 5 days after if you get written permission. And that's the key. It's up to one man. And he's made his decision. I think he's going to stick with it, and that's all right. That's all right. But everybody needs to get the right idea. We're not asking for privileges or something special. And I don't know how long you've been here, but I have been here 70 years. The signs don't annoy me. People like you that move here annoy me.
All right.
Does your attorney,
So,
attorney have
Tom, do you want to give us some wise words, please?
suggestion's been made that Mr. Smoak didn't consult with the town attorney, but that's not true. Normally, he doesn't need to consult with me because he usually assesses things pretty well. But in this case, he did consult with me about the applicability of some of these regulations to our rights of way in the town of Farragut. And I learned something and I'm not telling Mr. White anything he doesn't know. He does know this, but a lot of people don't realize what the right of way is. The right of way is generally about 6 to 10 feet on each side of the pavement. It can be more than that. It varies, but it's right up against where the road is. That's what the right of way is. That's where most utilities go. That's why we have it most of the time, to give expansion area for roads when we need to expand the roads. So we've got all of these roads in the town, and there's areas outside the pavement that are the town's right of way. That's a lot of area in the town that people could put signs if they wanted to. But there's thousands and thousands of other acres in the town where, if you know the people that own that, you can put your sign on their property. So there's all kinds of opportunity to do your advertising in the town of Farragut if you go out and find people who want to allow you to put your sign on their property. The town of Farragut has every right, as it does in this regulation, to say no signs in the right-of-way without getting consent. That is a prohibition against a sign being put in the right-of-way unless you get consent. Consent was requested in this event, and Mr. Smoak, to his credit, looked at it and said, well, it's probably not a good idea to allow people to put signs in the right-of-way because somebody with the town is going to have to walk around and make sure that it's not blocking the vision of motorists and creating a dangerous situation. Well, now, who's going to do that? We don't have a police department. We have a fine staff of people, but they've all got jobs. And what our people in the town do when they see signs in the right-of-way, the employees, I've seen it happen up here on this corner. I saw Holly Marlowe. I was driving by. She got out of her car in the parking lot, went up and pulled 2 signs out of the ground. They weren't campaign signs. They were just business signs. Pulled them out of the ground and put them in her car. Happens all the time. But we don't have people that run around town pulling up signs, and we need to, because potentially there's liability for the town if we have a regulation that says you don't put signs in the right-of-way, and we allow people to put signs in the right-of-way, and some motorist has an accident, and he has some smart lawyer, and the lawyer claims, well, if they had been enforcing their sign ordinance and kept these signs out of the right-of-way, this accident wouldn't have happened. Well, the next thing we know, we're in a lawsuit. So there are liability concerns about this that I think are not small. They're serious because we have a lot of right-of-way that we would have to monitor if this request were allowed. The next thing is, if this request were allowed and we were allowing certain candidates who happened to come and ask for permission, but we didn't allow other candidates, that'd be a problem. That would be a big problem. Well, it's not to be interpreted that way. It's not to be interpreted as you're interpreting it. And let me close by saying this. You've cited Reed versus Gilbert, town of Gilbert. Most unbelievable case I think I've read out of the Supreme Court in many years. Shocked everybody. Came out in 2015. Now think about this in today's world. All 9 justices on the Supreme Court agreed with the decision. They all agreed. I didn't think they agreed on anything, especially something like this. This decision said municipalities are prohibited from regulating signage on the basis of the content of what is on the sign. It didn't have to do with you regulated on the basis of being disagreeable about the content, or you disagreed with the content. You can't regulate signs on the basis of their content. If we granted this request, we would be adopting a regulation or allowing signs for political candidates. That's what it means by content-based, to be put in the right-of-way. We would be violating the Constitution of the United States by allowing signs that were content-based. It's as simple as what it is. And we would have to be able to demonstrate that our regulation was based on a serious public need that exceeded strict scrutiny, as the Supreme Court calls it. So, I couldn't believe the decision when the Supreme Court made it, because I've thought like the Ninth Circuit thought that made that decision that was overturned by the Supreme Court. I thought the only reason you could be prohibited from regulating speech is if it had you disagreed with the speech, and so you were prohibiting the speech because the town disagreed with it. There had to be some nefarious purpose or intent behind the town regulating it. The Supreme Court said no. It's just, and they actually dealt with political signs in the Gilbert decision. They looked at that sign ordinance from the town of Gilbert, and they said, you define political signs based on the content in the sign, therefore you're regulating on the basis of content. It's not content neutral signage. You cannot do that. Said the same thing with directional signs. You had to look at the sign. It's a directional sign, so it's content based. It just defies reason in some people's minds, but that's what the Supreme Court has said, and they've stuck with it. And we have rewritten since 2015. We've rewritten our entire sign ordinance, which used to regulate on the basis of whatever type of sign it was. If it was a political sign, you could do this. If it was a business sign that was on the front of the building, you could do this. We regulated everything on the basis of content because that was the easiest way to do it. It was very difficult, Mark will tell you, very difficult to amend our ordinance, but we did it, and I think right now we have a pretty content neutral sign ordinance. So we cannot, if anybody comes in and says we would like to have some special treatment under the sign ordinance for churches, we'd like to have that. Well, I love churches. I'd love to give churches special treatment, but that would be that would not be a content neutral regulation. So we couldn't do that. So, again, this is not personal to anybody. It's not personal to anybody. It is what the law requires. We've been dealing with this since 2015. We understand what the law is. I've researched a little bit today to make sure they hadn't changed the law. They hadn't changed it. So we're still stuck with living with this regulation. So to permit what is being requested would be a regulation that is prohibited by the Constitution, and I know of no rational reason why the municipality would have any kind of compelling interest to work around that restriction that we have. Given the fact that we have thousands and thousands of acres of property in this town where people can put their signs out wherever they want to, if they can get the owner of the property to consent, ownership of property has something to do with it. The town of Farragut has safety concerns, why they have this regulation in place, and if we start making exceptions, we're just asking for trouble, in my opinion. And if anybody has questions, I'll be happy to do the best I can to answer them.
I need a motion first and a second.
Motion to approve?
No, your motion to, are you motioning to approve his
No.
request or motioning to deny his request?
Oh, I thought we were discussing first.
I need a motion and a second before we can discuss.
Okay, you've got a motion.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I'm not seconding.
Motion to what?
Motion to, what's your motion? There's a motion right here. The recommendation.
Motion to discuss, or motion to request to allow temporary political signs on the town of Farragut public property and rights of way.
Are
To
you-
discuss it.
You have to make a motion to deny or approve. Do you want to allow this?
Look at the bottom.
Look at the bottom recommendation motion.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm wanting to discuss it. I apologize if I said that the wrong way.
I understand you want to discuss it, but I need a motion on the floor and a second before we can discuss it.
In the emotion of approved or denied.
Yes. Doesn't mean your motion can't be changed.
It doesn't
Yeah.
make, we don't have to make a motion.
We can just, you're right. I don't need that it dies without a second.
I guess, Tom, would you weigh in on his feedback that this should not be a vote? This shouldn't be on the board. This should only be with the town administrator.
Well, the plain language of the ordinance is that the town administrator, if he thinks it's the right thing to do in his discretion and using his judgment, thinks it's appropriate and good in the best interest of the town to do it, he can grant that authority. The reality is, it could have ended right there when Mr. Smoak decided this was not a good idea. But instead, what does it look like if we don't at least bring it to the board and let the board consider it? It looks like we're trying to cut off debate. So my sense of it has been, we're trying to do the right thing to give you a forum where you can come and talk about what you want to talk about, and if you can persuade the board, I'm sure they can override Mr. Smoak if that's what they want to do. So you've had your say, and rightfully so, if that's what you wanted to do, but it's not appropriate to blame Mr. Smoak, who disagrees with you, because he exercised his right to say, I'm not going to authorize this. But then he did you the favor of allowing you to come and possibly persuade these good people to make a different decision. Well, I'm sorry you see it that way.
So at this point, I do not have a motion or a second. So it would die without a vote.
If you don't take it up on a motion or second, then it would die for lack of motion.
Vice Mayor, I'll say a few things. I mean, I appreciate you coming in and presenting your case. I am thankful that the town administrator allowed the board to discuss it. I think with many counselors, you often come up with better wisdom, so appreciate you presenting it to the board. And I'll just say a few words because you took time to submit this and come present this. So my thoughts on it, most of my thoughts were very kind of practical related. How do you take care of the right-of-way? What are you asking Bud and his staff to do? What does our town look like if we allow something like this visually? Some other obvious things are who would want to go to a park and see political signs sprayed all over the inside of a park? Practically
Or signs of any nature.
any nature, not political, I mean any nature. I don't ever want to see that. It's one of the things that most all of us love about our community. And then there's, again, a practical side that's right now when you drive by and see someone's sign, say in a business, in front of a business, you know that business supports said candidate. And that speaks to me. If I know the owner of the business, if I know the business, that's helpful. When I know people's houses in the community and I see certain signs in their yard, I know who they're supporting, and that means something. This would make that useless. This would be who could have the most money and put the most signs up, and I'm definitely not for that. So clearly I wouldn't support anything that only supported a certain number of candidates. Just completely unfair to other candidates that are running. It's not my opinion that I'm giving you for Town of Farragut elections. It's my opinion on all signs moving forward. So it's not at all, like I said, has nothing to do with the Town of Farragut election, but everything to do with our town, keeping it clutter-free. Those are more of my practical points, and the town attorney has made some very strong points that clearly I support as well. That's all I have, Vice Mayor.
I want to make a couple of comments.
Good.
First of all, the current sign ordinance has served us well for over 40 years, number one. Two, everybody on this board currently has had to abide by these rules. We've had to put our signs where they were properly supposed to be, and that was it. I did not receive one correspondence from anybody in favor of this, but I received several correspondences from people who wanted us to deny it. They're not at all interested in seeing signs in parks, greenways, right-of-ways. If I've got a 12-foot right-of-way in front of my house and I want to advocate for one candidate and I put my candidate sign out there, this would allow everybody else to put their signs in front of my house. That's a right-of-way out there. So what I'm hearing is you want to be able to put a sign in my yard.
Not really. You wouldn't be allowed to have.
I will say this, when Reed v. Gilbert was decided, Justice Alito wrote a concurrent opinion indicating that the right of a municipality to regulate signs in the right-of-way was not surrendered. It was simply about the content of the signs. So, and that's all I'm going to state. I'm fine to, we don't have a motion, we don't have a second. The decision that David Smoak made stands, as far as I can tell.
I think.
So,
You want to finish up the meeting?
does the mayor, I guess the mayor would like to return back to the meeting.